Stanford University.
So hello, I'm Michelle Marinkovich, an Associate Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education and Director of CTL. And it's wonderful to see you here. Welcome. Thank you for coming to the second in our award-winning Teachers on Teaching talks for 2011-12. And the rest of the schedule with some great topics and speakers is there for you to see. Today we are very pleased and greatly honored to have the Ruth G. and William K. Bowes Professor of Engineering Emeritus, Channing Robertson, of Chemical Engineering, who's going to talk to us about why his students call him Yoda. And I'm going to have to admit that as soon as Channing gave us that title, and even though he gave us a précis that gave a foreshadowing of what he was covering, I got very curious about what he's really going to say. So I'm anxious to hear him talk. But I would like to give you a little background about Channing first. He received his BS in chemical engineering with honors from the University of California, Berkeley in 1965. And then having seen the light, he crossed the bay to Stanford, earning his master's in 1968 and his PhD in 1970, both in chemical engineering. It predicted Channing's incredible future productivity that he finished his PhD just 2 years after his master's. I don't know about you, but that kind of took my breath away. And then he stepped right into an assistant professorship at Stanford. A mere 8 years later, he was chair of his department and a full professor. And actually, I hope Channing will tell us not only why his students call him Yoda, but the secrets of his academic productivity, because the numbers are staggering. He has authored or co-authored 159 publications, given 167 paper presentations, provided 342 invited seminars all over the world, supervised 44 PhD dissertations, received 6 patents with a 7th one pending, and what's particularly pertinent for us, at least 5 teaching awards, including the Stanford Society of Women Engineers Teacher of the Year Award, the Stanford Society of Chicano Latino Engineers and Scientists Faculty of the Year Award, the Dinkelspiel Award, contributions to undergraduate education, and a Bass University Fellowship. His service to Stanford has been similarly amazing. Besides serving as chair of his department twice, his work with alumni has garnered him both the Stanford Associates Award twice, their Centennial Medallion, and the Richard W. Lyman Award. He also served on the Provost's Budget Group and for several years as Senior Associate Dean for Faculty and Academic Affairs in the School of Engineering. And that's only what he's done on campus. His research has exemplified the university's emphasis on making the world a better and healthier place for all of us, especially in his testimony and pursuit of tobacco product regulation and less painful ways to provide drugs and other therapies. We might all be spared shots one day thanks to his work. So Channing proves that you can do it all and have a full personal and family life. But what really makes him remarkable is the relaxed style, the humor, and the panache that he brings to whatever he does. To interact with Channing, whether it is students in the classroom or administrators in a meeting, is to interact with someone who brings a spirit of humor, goodwill, energy, and just plain fun to every encounter. I hope for that reason, Channing, that you won't mind if I describe you as quintessentially a Californian, a Southern Californian, quintessentially a Stanfordite, and quintessentially a citizen of the world, the kind of world that we would all like to spend more time in. I turn you over to Professor Channing Robertson.
Well, when Michelle asked me to come and speak, I said no. And the reason I said no is she sent me all the names of the people who have given talks here before, and I can't hold a candle to those people. And I said, you know, what are you trying to do, wreck this? And she says, no, she kept bugging me, and I complained to my wife, and my wife said, Donna, she says, just do it and get it over with, and then she'll stop emailing you. So here I am. Now, she says, give me a title. And so I said, all right, why do students call me Yoda? Why do you think? Well, it's the resemblance, best I can tell. And I did have one student call me that once, and I see some folks here in the audience. I see one of my Howie Rosen, one of my former advisees who I met in Stern or Wilbur about 35 years ago. He's now retired. He retired before I did, you know, so. And Cliff and Jim Schwartz, two folks from my department, Annalise, who worked with me in the dean's office. So thank you for all coming to support me. And for the rest of you, just hang on. So let me give you a little context of how I got into this business. See, what Michelle left out is the kind of stuff you don't put on your CV. I'm going to share it with you. So yeah, I did go to Berkeley in the 60s. It was a very interesting time. One thing I didn't know is, well, I applied to two colleges, universities, Berkeley and Stanford. And I didn't know where either of them was. I wanted to go to SC or UCLA, because where all my high school friends went. But I had spent most of my high school years surfing, and my mother decided that I should go north where the water's colder. And I got into both places, but none of my friends from high school got into Stanford. So I went to Berkeley because I wanted to be with them. Now, I didn't realize Berkeley was a land-grant school, and you had to be an ROTC in those days. Now, I'm a pacifist, and I didn't want to be an ROTC. So I tried to get into the band, but they didn't need a piano. It was a marching band. I also played the accordion, but that didn't work either in a military marching band. So in a fit of frustration, I burned my uniform and my draft card, for which I got 4 units of F and got kicked out and became on the most wanted list of the draft board. The Vietnam War was going on at the time. So when I graduated in '65, neither of my parents went to college, so I had no idea about going on to graduate school, other than the only way I could keep my deferment was to go to graduate school. And it turns out that 2 profs at Berkeley, my undergraduate advisor and another guy I'd had as a prof, and their 2 TAs had come to Stanford to the chemical engineering department to start building a serious chemical engineering department here at Stanford. So I came in '65 as the first sort of serious graduate class here at Stanford in chemical engineering, which had fallen out of the chemistry department because the chemists didn't like applied people. And so we were run out. And so as she said, 4 years later, my PhD, the war is now raging. And so what I didn't say is I left a Stanford post office box number so the draft board could write repeated requests for me to show up for my medical, and we went to Europe. We landed in Belgium, and it was cold, so we drove to Greece, where it was warm. And then there was an amnesty program if you come back and work for a critical industry. And for chemical engineers in those days, that was petrochemicals or oil. And they were either located in Texas or New Jersey. 2 places, sorry folks, I didn't want to go. I did find a little company in Denver, Colorado, Marathon Oil. I had never heard of Marathon Oil, but they had a research division there. So I went there. 3 weeks later, I'm fired, which was a bummer. Now, the so-called alleged reason is because I never showed up, which was true. But the skiing was so good that I said I'll get around to showing up. You know, I have a PhD, and PhDs are kind of odd people, and you know, I'll get to work one of these days. Well, they didn't buy that, so Donna, who, poor lady's still married to me after 46 years, I said, I'm going to go to medical school because I'm going to be my own boss. So I applied to medical school. I'd never taken a course in biology or biochemistry in my life. I went to the University of Colorado, medical school library in Denver. I read everything I could, took the MCATs, got in, and lo and behold, is just ready to go to medical school. I get a call from the chairman of the department here at Stanford saying, hey, we hear you're having a little job issue. And I said, well, this is true. We had a disagreement about work hours and commitment and so forth. And he said, I hear you're going to medical school. I said, yeah. He says, well, why don't you come back to Stanford and help start a program in bioengineering? Because we don't know any chemical engineers who know anything about biology. You must, because you got admitted to medical school. Oh boy, did I pull a wool over their eyes. So I'm not even sure there was a search. I mean, we don't do things like this anymore. But we come out in a 65 Mustang, pull up in front of Encina Hall, go in to look for the rental catalog for houses. I walk into the wrong office. A lady named Lucille Long's in there. She says, who are you? I said, I want the rental catalog. You know, only to rent to Stanford people. Those are special places in Palo Alto and Menlo Park. And she says, why? I says, well, I'm a new faculty. And she says, you don't want to rent. I said, I don't. She said, what do I want to do? She says, you want to build. I said, build what? I said, I've got a 65 Mustang, everything I own in it, including my wife and dog. And I've got about $125 to my name. She says, that's enough. So for a $20 down payment, she reached down, picked a wooden stake out of her desk, sent me off on the other side of Stanford Avenue. We pounded it into the ground and homesteaded, and we still live there today. So this is a different life today than that. People don't go around homesteading in Palo Alto any longer. And then came the big wake-up call. Summer of 70, late summer, I walk in, find that they had just hired another faculty member, my roommate from Berkeley, who I hadn't seen in 4 years. They didn't even know we knew each other. And of course, we didn't tell them what we did as undergraduates together. But that was a great sort of comedic experience. And the older, wiser people in the department said, okay, you two, we want you to start a new 3-quarter applied math series. And we only have one undergraduate in chemical engineering at Stanford, and we want you to grow that to at least 25. See ya. So here we have, imagine this now. I've never taught in my life. I'm expected to, within a month, put together a 3-quarter series in applied mathematics, which I've never taught. I learned, presumably. We're stuck in old Chem 20, the old condemned chemistry building. There's a great auditorium in there if you've ever snuck in there. That we taught in, and we had no mentors, no teachers, no idea other than to emulate, and this is part of the story, emulate the best teachers that I ever had, whether it was in elementary school or junior high or high school or Berkeley or at Stanford. Because we had nothing to go on. There's no book. My wife was a teacher. She had to go to school and get a teaching credential and pass a whole bunch of tests to teach. Come to Stanford, easy. You don't have to have anything. You just walk in and you're expected to be able to be an effective, good teacher. So what did we do? Well, we had to start an undergraduate program, so I said to Bud, my colleague, and this was when the first Star Wars movie came out. So this was how Yoda comes into this. I said, we just can't put this course, Introduction to Chemical Engineering, into the catalog. First of all, who's going to come to that? Introduction to Chemical Engineering? So we took a full page, we paid for this ourselves, a full page ad out in the Daily. And we called it Star Wars. And you remember the opening of Star Wars, how the print side had disappeared? So I got a print typesetter to do that kind of thing. And this ad had a picture of the two of us, and we were in costume. I was Dr. Glitz, and he was Captain Safety, and I had a sequined outfit on. And we took pictures, and the faculty saw this. And they said, what have you guys been smoking? I said, the same old stuff we've been smoking all these years. And they said, oh, man, no one's ever done this. So we had people lined up outside the chemistry building trying to get into Chem 20, trying to figure out what this was about. And I gave the first course on talking about biomass and biomass conversion to energy. We need to have an example, so I'm big on examples. So I put Bud, my colleague, in a trash can And I dragged it in to see, what do you find in trash? Oh, that'd be kind of funny if he came out. Well, I forgot that he was in the can, and the can was sitting over here, and I started lecturing. And then I started seeing wisps of smoke come out of the can. So he's lit up a joint, and he's in there smoking it. I lift this thing up, this cloud of smoke comes out, he pops out in his costume, and that began a class that still is taught today. I taught it for probably 35 years. And Howie, I think, went through that. Cliff went through it. And it was a blast. But it was the first time I was able to sort of wrap my arms around what does it mean to teach and how does one teach. Now, I'm not here to talk about methodology or technology because whatever works for me may not work for you. But I do have a few key ideas. When I go into the classroom, one of the questions I ask myself, even today, I started a new class last year. I have class at 2 o'clock today. I mean, it may seem, what emeritus means is your title just gets longer and your pay gets less. That's what emeritus means. So I'm still hanging out teaching and started this new energy class. And every time I go into the classroom, I always ask myself, why am I here? What purpose am I serving? What are the students expecting me to do? And what does it mean to be an effective teacher when no one ever taught me how to teach? I mean, think about it. That's kind of weird. I mean, would sort of IBM hire you to program computers if you'd never even used a computer? I mean, it was pretty basic. So I asked myself, what is my role in the classroom? And I believe strongly in that it's passing on the experiences I've had and the intuition I've been able to develop over the years to the students. And it's not so much about the exact content. Because I'm convinced most students forget most of the content unless they have to use it. Most students are able to find content if they need it, particularly now with the internet and so forth. And if all I'm doing is delivering content, they can get it from a book, they can get it from TV, they can get it over the internet. So why do they need me? I could just videotape myself and they could just play this thing over and over again. So I try to walk into the classroom and talk about the content that I know I'm trying to get across, but in the context of my experiences and what I've learned. That's kind of the Yoda stuff, you know, the passing on the force. Now, sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't work so well, but to me, it makes it fun. So the issues I have with particularly young professors, the role models that they've had are basically what I call the fire hose syndrome people. How much can you drink in an hour if I just sit there and spray content all over you? And now that I have PowerPoint, I can really go fast, right? So I'm old-fashioned. I don't use PowerPoint, except I like to show videos. You know when your picture's worth 1,000 words? It's not showing graphs. It's not showing tables. It's not showing that. But it's sometimes really helpful to show a 2-minute video or a 3-minute video or something like that. So I use that. I use the blackboard. Nothing better than to go up and have to write myself, because then does it become a copy fest? How fast can I copy? I remember going into classes and all I did was copy, and my mind wasn't processing what I was copying until I got back to my room and I read it, and then I didn't understand half of what it meant. And I figured, well, that was a colossal waste of time. So, you know, if you sort of wrap your arms around the fact that you're really not there to see how much content you can deliver, and what you are there is to take what little ideas and pieces of content that you can put together that you can wrap your experience and intuition around. Because they'll go away and they'll probably remember that, or at least there's a good chance students will remember that. What do students expect? Well, after teaching here for almost 45 years, I'm not quite sure. But I think what many students expect is to see the world through my eyes, as I have seen the world, and sort of serve that as a conduit to them so that they can begin to sort of assimilate the experiences I've had and put them into the context of other experiences they've had to kind of put these building blocks together. I view getting an education as sort of getting a toolkit. You know, it's like I can give you a toolkit with a hammer and a screwdriver and a wrench, and I don't know what you're going to do with that. Rather than tell you this is the kind of house you should build, you figure out the tools to do it. I think it's the reverse. You sort of, what are the basic things? And I think being at Stanford, where people get a liberal education as well as can access science and technology, is a great place. It's one of the reasons I don't teach at some other schools that have end in technology or institute or something like that. I value being here with students who are broadly thinking beyond just technology and science. I like using the Socratic method. Sometimes it's very uncomfortable for students when I ask a question. You know, typically what happens, a prof asks a question, and if there's no response, the prof answers the question, if they know the answer. I'll answer a question, I'll sit there for 10 minutes until people really start getting uncomfortable and say, you answer or say something. Because I think teaching's a two-way street. And if you don't engage the students, you become nothing more than, you know, the ABC News at 6 o'clock, you know, the talking head. And, you know, I could go in and talk to the wall. I don't have to talk to them. I think for us as teachers, attitude is huge. I can't tell you the number of young professors I've mentored over the years who come in and say, you know, God, I got to teach one course a quarter. That's a real burden. I said, burden? You're at a university. Part of what you want to do is teach. And you sit there and say, well, why is it that that's such a burden? Of course, I tell my friends in Palo Alto who don't teach, what a soft job I have. I only have to get up and talk 3 hours a week. I wish I could do that. Well, you can sort of turn that on end. So what I find is the reward system is a little screwed up. Do you get tenure because you're a great teacher? You don't. Do you get tenure if you're a great scholar and a poor teacher? It used to be the case. It's less so now. But it's the reward system. So if you go up and you try to teach and you try to do a really good job, and then you get really crummy student evaluations, and then you're told it doesn't really count in your future, what's the motivation for even trying to improve your lot? So I think attitude has a lot to do with it, and I think that a lot of that attitude has to be self-generated, because the system doesn't quite, in my opinion, work perhaps as it should to foster the desire in people to go into the classroom and be effective and teach and get engaged and spend that time that's required in order to accomplish that. A lot has to do with, I think, time management and balancing one's life and so forth. But it's hard for a young faculty member who sees a 6-year time horizon to getting tenure, and it's do or die. It's up or out. And so that immediately begins to set some of the priorities. What's the other reward system? I have found over the years, probably the greatest reward is seeing students I've taught ultimately become really successful in what they do, and they write you or they call you and they thank you, ultimately. I think right after you teach a class, they're worn out, maybe they didn't do so well, so they're taking it out on you. You know, and they haven't had time, they're going to sort of see everything from 10,000 feet. So you're not quite sure what you're going to get. I think Howie, when I met Howie and he came in and he says, I want to be a chemical engineer. He's this little wiry-haired guy coming up to me, and I had my kid sitting here in my lap. She's now 40 years old. And Howie's a great success story. And Cliff ended up on the faculty. It's terrific. I wouldn't have known that time I had them in class. They weren't particularly great students. They weren't, memorable, but we stayed in touch and everything worked out. I said I wasn't going to talk about techniques, so these really aren't techniques, but I'll show you. I don't do what I hated profs made me do when I was in school. So in my classes, no exams in class. All my exams are take-home. Take as much time as you want. That's the way life is. You're going to be given problems in life, and you're going to be able to go sit someplace quiet and think about them and not have the stress of an exam. I did horrible on exams. I was a horrible test taker, and I hated that kind of pressure. I will not inflict that on anybody. Not everybody agrees with this philosophy. Tough. That's the way I do it, and it seems to work. Now, the biggest problem is students, how much time should I spend on this? And then they come back and say, well, I spent all this time and I got this rotten grade. I said, what does that tell you? So it tells you something about time management and how you effectively used or didn't use your time, or else you don't get you don't understand the material very well. So what this also eliminates is memorization. I hate memorization, and for engineering in particular, you don't want to run into engineers that have everything memorized and then they get it wrong and then the bridge falls down. That's just not the way it works. So memorization, it's how to find stuff, not how to memorize it. So no memorization for me. You got to realize, when I showed up here in 1970, we had rotary dial telephones. Most of you don't know what those are. And you would pick it up and you'd dial 0. You'd get a Stanford operator, and if you wanted to call something, you'd give him or her the number, and you'd hang up the phone. And an hour or two later, the phone would ring. And it would be your connection. You might say, how did the world work? It worked perfectly well in those days. We didn't have Xerox machines. We had these things called mimeographs. The blue thing. And right before lecture, I would go into the room where the mimeograph, I'd stick my head in it and get a big whiff of those VOCs, get high on this stuff, and go in and lecture. I think it had a lot to do with my being an effective teacher. You go in there, you're all, jazzed up on this stuff. They don't have mimeograph machines anymore. So I had to search for other things. We were using slide rules. We had no handheld calculators, and the mainframe computer here wasn't as powerful as what I have in my iPhone. I mean, think about it. And when you submitted a program, you submitted a shoebox of cards, you put them through a slot. There were people behind the slot with the computers, which had all these fake lights blinking to make it look really, ooh, like Hal. And about 2 days later, you'd go back, and the box of cards would come back, and it would say, did not compile. And then you'd repeat this process. Life was good. It was at a much slower pace. And you know what? Students actually used the library. Students are under the misconception that Google is a library, or that Wikipedia is a library. Probably the largest collection of unverified information on the face of the earth. So my only requirement when they do projects is that you can have references to URLs and websites and stuff, but 50% of those have to be to a legitimate, original, verified source. Otherwise, I don't take it. I just, I don't have a problem with Googling, or I don't have a problem with Wikipedia, but usually what I do is I find 3 or 4 Wikipedia sites about things I know about, like physics or math, and they're completely wrong. You put those up, and you say, if you didn't know that, you'd accept it. But who are these people out there putting all this? You have no idea who's doing that. I'm big on projects, written and oral projects, primarily oral. I think when you get out of this place, if you can't express yourself, get up and talk in front of a group of people, you are destined to be at the bottom of the food chain, or near the bottom of the food chain. I think it's really important to be able to form thoughts on your feet, answer questions, be challenged on your feet. And that's just what I've seen in my experience out in if this is the unreal world, the real world out there. And so projects are a big part of, and group projects too. Because, this business, Bozo over here didn't do his share of the project and so forth. I don't care. That's life. You take Bozo, whack him around a little bit, get him interested. It's not my problem. It's your group. You take over, you be leader, become dictator, however you want to make it work, but just get the job done. So, give you some examples. I taught fluid mechanics for 30 years. Fluid mechanics, what's that? Flow and pipes. So, how do you make that interesting? How do you make fluid mechanics interesting? I think you do it by example. At the end of the course, after 10 weeks, the students are sitting there, God, I learned all this stuff. I don't know what to do with it. I don't think I can do anything with it. And they're freaked out. So I sit them down, the last lecture, I say, okay, imagine a pipeline from north part of Alaska to Valdez. And you've got oil up there, and you've got to get down to Valdez. Size the pumping stations. They go, what? I said, yeah, here, take a group here, group here, group here. Ask me any question you want, but by the end of this lecture, in 75 minutes, we're going to have designed the Alaskan pipeline. We can't do that. Or it's already designed. I said, that doesn't matter. It's already designed. We're going to design it. And I'll tell you, at the end of those 75 minutes, they ask questions like, well, what's the flow rate? How big's a pipeline? On and on. They start getting the idea of this is how you wrap your arms around a problem. And they're interacting. And then I get these groups competing. So they want to design it. And I'll tell you, every year I did that, they came within about 5% of sizing the pump requirements for that pipeline. And they go away and say, we can really do something serious. How do you teach drag, flow past objects? I teach them about sports balls. What's the theory behind why are there dimples on a golf ball or laces on a baseball? Or why is a basketball this big and why is a golf ball that big? And in the end, you find out, just with what they've learned, that the size of the ball is inversely related to the speed of the game. The faster the game goes, the smaller the ball. What are the dimples for? The ball goes faster. It's totally counterintuitive. Goes further. Totally counterintuitive. Why is that? Well, you start digging into it, you can see the principles that they learned answer those questions. So I think if you put it in the form of an example that is of some interest to them, they tend to pay attention. One of the great, I don't know if Cliff or Howie did this one, homework problems in E20 was, we had built this house, and I wanted a hot tub. And I go to the hot tub people, and they say, well, you need this, and you need this heater and stuff. I said, that heater's too big. What do you know about heat transfer? You know, it's this guy who's been selling jock straps at Costco the day before. And I said, what do you know about the heater? He says, well, I don't know. They just say, build this heater. So I gave it to the class. I said, we're going to do a project. I'm teaching you heat transfer. You're going to design my hot tub. And when we get the hot tub design, you're going to come to my house, and we're going to build it, and we're going to heat it up, and we're all get naked and jump inside, which we did. Now, we don't do that anymore. It was okay back in the 70s. So sorry, I'm not a predator. And they did, and I have students who write me today saying, I remember the hot tub problem. Do you still have your hot tub? Does it still work? And that sort of stuff. The field trips, I'm big on field trips because I liked them. Two things I liked in high school, field trips and movies. And so John Brovman, some of you may have heard of him, was vice provost. What was he? Something with vice provost. John Brovman was a freshman advisee of mine. And then he became my boss. It sucks in a way. And so he ran the intro seminars were under him. And I started teaching intro seminars because I liked the notion of, at least having part of the year a really small class. And they sent this little email that says, you can take your students on a field trip. And we'll pay for it. So I took the class on a field trip. I bought them all round-trip tickets on Southwest Airlines. I flew them to Phoenix, the entire class. We went down to a test track. We took crash dummies. We crashed cars. We ran around with robots all day long. And I brought them back, and then I submitted the bill. And they go, what's this? Field trip. You got $3,000 of airplane tickets. I said, well, the field trip was in Phoenix, and that's why we had to go there. We've done that for 7 years in a row. And it just goes to show you that if you kind of think out of the box, you can make things happen around here. And the students, I think, we're what? We're going to go to, and I said, if you got a midterm or something, I'll write you a note. You can get out of it. I probably know the prof teaching the class. We'll take care of it. And so next Tuesday, we're off to Phoenix. And we're going to crash. We take 2 cars, crash them together, usually head on at about 60 miles an hour. We put little baby dummies and big adult dummies in. We're all computerized. And then they go in and extricate them, and we have the fire department there. We're showing them how you use the jaws of life. I mean, they're going to remember that in terms of engineering and kind of the interest, and get them engaged. It's certainly a lot better than reading a textbook. So I think engaging them actively, the students, is an important ingredient in a classroom. So, for me to walk in, give a lecture, and then turn around and walk out isn't any fun. It's just not any fun for me. So, what I'd like to do is, well, one last thing, and then maybe we'll have some time for questions and answers, is one thing I did notice. When I first started teaching, I had a real strong bond with the students, and I realized I was only 5 years older than them. So I was really their friend. And then there came this period where they became very detached and very suspicious and lurking around, and I realized at that time I was the age of their parents. Now, I'm the age of their grandparents. They love me again. And so I'm really right back in this. I'll tell you, the beginning of this quarter, this intro sem I have, there's only 16. So I say, tell us where you're from, where you're living on campus, one thing that everybody can remember about you. And I began by giving a little bit about myself. And I said, well, I started teaching here in 1970, and the first young lady, her eyes are the size of saucers. And she says, did you say you started teaching, you were here teaching in 1970? I said, yeah, I was. She says, my father wasn't even born in 1970. Her father, much less her. And I said, what am I supposed to do with that piece of information other than, Yoda, I guess that's it. So thanks for your attention. I hope this has served. It's been fun, at least, all right? And so if you want to shout at me, ask some questions, please feel free to do so. And you can get out of here whenever you feel like it. Yeah?
Do you think you could do the same thing or have the same path that you started in the 60s now, if you would start over now?
No. Yeah. No, because things were run differently, shall I say. And I actually struggle with that when I see people, as many of you, your age, having to confront, say, I want to have an academic career. And how can I, how can I go about that? I wish I had, I would encourage you to remain very optimistic. I would encourage you to take the point of view there's nothing you can't do if you set yourself to it, and forget about what appear to be insurmountable barriers. Because those have been created by other people, not you. And there's always a way around them. I've always loved to figure out a way around things that bureaucracies put in my way. It's sort of the nonconformist piece of me, I guess you would say. I think the potential future's as bright. The path is just a little different. But the path is there, certainly. It's there. And I always say worrying has never gotten me anywhere in life, ever. So I don't worry. Things suck, I don't care. That's just the way it is. I don't worry. My kid calls me up and he says he's upside down in a car on Highway 17, and that's the jaws of life that I hear pulling him out. And I said, yeah, are you going to make it in time for dinner? Well, I mean, you know, he's alive and he's well and he's got a little car problem. And so I think you kind of we tend to magnify the things that get us down, and we forget about how fortunate we are to be where we are today and have, you know, an incredible future ahead of us. I think you just have to seize that, and you just have to keep working the positive angle. And I'm not, you know, one of these guys who write books on positive thinking, but I think negative thinking serves very little purpose. And I've been in some really nasty political situations here and stuff when I was in the dean's office. You can imagine failed tenure cases, grievances, I mean, all kinds of stuff. But, you know, in the end, you just work your way through it and don't dwell on it. So are you having some issues in your path? Is that?
I think so, but I think that people have a feeling that, like you say, the pace of life is so fast, and I think we perceive maybe more pressure than we should, and also just because of ourselves, because we're driven and we want to do 1,000 things at the same time. We want to have a beautiful career, we want to teach, we want to have a family, maybe we want to have an enriched life, and it just seems like there might not be space for all of that.
There is, I think, if you carve it up properly, and I think that comes down to, I've always said, what's first? And I've always said, well, it's my wife and kids. That's first. So if it was a soccer game, I'd go to the soccer game and not go to a meeting. And who remembered me being at the soccer game or not being at the soccer game? And who remembered me being at the meeting and not being at the meeting? Why would I care about them? Those people, those other academics out there. I mean, this sounds pretty crass, but that's the way it is. I can get on the phone, I can talk to them, I can go give a paper, I can leave. I mean, I just never felt beholden to that. So I feel carving out those pieces and setting your priorities so that you do have enough time. You may not have all the time you want. I mean, nothing works out. There's never enough time. And I think what's happened with the internet, to give you an example, or the web or whatever, is this thing that you have to reply instantly. You get an email, and if you don't reply in an hour, you're getting a reminder email. I mean, it's stupid. We never had to deal with that. I used to have a thing on my email which said the bounce back was go away. And that doesn't stop anybody. They then write you back in capital letters. You know, I mean, that just doesn't work. But you have to set the pace. And you can set the pace, I think, around yourself, and that's your pace, it's your life. You know, fundamentally, you ask how many, I was talking with Don about this last night, I said, how many good friends do we really have? We lived in this area for 50 years. We probably have a dozen. You think about your little sphere of really close friends that you do, the people that you would really rely on and depend upon, as opposed to all the people that on the onion skin around it who somehow are connected to you and rely on you in some way. But it's not where it's life or death. And the way you find out about that is, I just went to Europe for 2 weeks, and I didn't answer anything. And all these emails came in, and they started piling up. Oh, we need you, I need you this or that. You know what? I come back, 99% of those problems got solved, because you know what? Those people went somewhere else. If you think about it, the internet gives you really easy access to get other people to do probably what you should be doing, and then making them feel guilty for not doing it. It's kind of a sick system in a way. So I don't know if that helps at all, but I think you look like you've got a real fine spirit, and I think you're going to do just fine in the end. All of you are. Yeah.
Oh, I just want to follow up on that a little bit. So you tell a story. It's somewhat reminiscent of the story that Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or Craig Venter tells about a world that allowed them to be creative because they could break rules. And it's a different world now. It's more rigid. There are more rules. what impact do you think that's having on students' creativity now?
I think it's stifling it. I really do. You know, it's a role model, right? I mean, if I came in and, you know, okay, you're going to learn fluid mechanics whether you like it or not, F equals MA. If you don't get F equals MA, go major in English. And, you know, I mean, what's that all about? You know, I think if you exemplify your experience, as I try to do mine, I don't think my experience is any better than any of yours, quite frankly, or anybody else's, or Steve Jobs. I knew him well, but he had a whole different persona about him, you know, and also a nonconformist. You might say, I don't know, maybe it's the culture of the 60s that hasn't ever come back in the way we once experienced it, and we never got out of it. You know, they say if you can remember the 60s, you weren't there. You know, I mean, that's that. I try to move with the times. For instance, in this energy class I'm teaching, where we give projects, I said, okay, you know what the project's going to be? Go make a movie about solar power or about photovoltaics. And that was hugely popular. They went out, we got them cameras if they didn't have cameras. They went out, they interviewed people, they put on costumes, they became different people. And they all came back with their little 15-minute movies, and we showed them to everybody in the class. It was a very cool assignment. And you know what? I think they learned an awful lot. I mean, they went up and interviewed the people doing nuclear, went up and interviewed Burton Richter, you know, Nobel Prize winner. I said, interview anybody you want with Dr. Richter. I said, call Bert up and go interview him. And so he says, is this being taped? And he says, yeah, well, I don't do tape. And the student says, well, Channing said you would. I said, all right. And then he launches on this whole thing about nuclear energy stuff. And that gets on YouTube. And it's crazy. But I think it's something we can help with as teachers to convince them that the world isn't as rigid as it might seem, and that there's plenty of room to be creative. I was telling Michelle, she says, what are you doing now that you're retired? As if, you know, I'm like, you know, sipping mint juleps on the beach or something. And I said, well, you know, I started a company with a student. And she said, well, what? So this will give you an idea. A young lady walks into my office. She says, I'm Elizabeth Holmes. I said, okay. And she says, I'm a freshman. She says, I hear that you have political power. And I said, well, what do you need done? And she says, they won't let me take more than 22 units. What's the matter with these people here? I says, well, Elizabeth, 22 units usually is like a death sentence to most students. She says, well, I'm bored. Can I work in your lab? And I said, well, do you know any chemistry? She says, I'll know what I need to know. I said, okay. Put her in the lab. She works with one of my graduate students. At the end of her freshman year, she says, you have students that have gone to Singapore and are involved in biotech. I said, yeah. And I want to go to Singapore and work with them. I says, but Elizabeth, the ones I know of, they're in Chinese-speaking companies. She says, I'm fluent in Chinese. Oh, okay, so off to China. She comes back. She's now standing in my doorway. She says, start a company. I said, Elizabeth, you're 19. She says, what's that supposed to mean? I said, well, I mean, because I'm going to get in the sexual harassment league and get in line for those guys. And so I said, no, I don't mean that. I said, you just should finish your Stanford degree. She said, what for? I said, well, it'd be good for you. And she says, no, let's start a company. I said, do you have a business plan? Well, I know what I want to do. So I said, okay, I'll fix her. I took her to the worst, nastiest VC I know in the Valley, venture capitalist. He sits there growling like a pit bull behind a desk. There's nothing on it. He just sits there and just tosses people out. So we go in there and sit down. She explains what she wants to do. He just tears her apart. We walk out. She's got a big smile on her face. She says, he didn't get it. Who's next? I mean, that's what it takes. I says, geez. So I introduced her to some friendly VCs. So at age 19, she started this company. She's now 25. The company's still going. There's several other people working there, and it's a huge success. And she says, I'll go back to school when I need to, if I want to. So you talk about unconventional paths. I mean, it's just the sheer determination that she had and the vision that she had. I tell people, I feel like when I look at her, I'm looking through the eyes of Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or Michael Dell or people like that. I mean, it's just, you just see it in somebody, and it's marvelous. And I think the last thing you want to do is, I did call her Dad, and I said, Mr. Holmes, I've really tried to keep your daughter at Stanford. And he goes, what's she up to? I says, well, she wants to start a company. He says, I knew it. And so what's going to happen? And I said, I think she's going to start the company. He says, well, be sure I don't get cut out. So, I mean, you know, okay, Dad. I mean, whatever you say. All right, anyone else here? Yeah.
That's a more benign question. When I'm involved in discussing curriculum, there's always this discussion of how much facts you should present to students and then how much you should teach them in order to be able to obtain the facts when they need them. On the other hand, you know, if you stop learning how to calculate it, always use a calculator. That's bad for you because you need to do calculations in your brain. So just to give you a simple example, so what type of feeling did you develop to balance between teaching facts and teaching methods, and how to come up with the right way of doing that?
That's a very good point. I think couching what you have them do in terms of calculations, gathering data, synthesizing and putting it together, it's something that's a skill they need to acquire. There's no question about it. But that's different than assigning sort of what I call mindless problem sets, you know, make work kind of stuff. I think if you put it in the context of something that they can relate to as having some meaning to it, like designing an airplane or a car or something to get their hands around, the calculations tend to follow, and their ability to go out and get the information tends to follow. At least that's been my experience. And of course, calculations are very different today than they were. You know, when I started teaching her, you couldn't to get a logarithm, you had to look it up in a table and write down the anti-log and add the two together and subtract it. Remember all that? I mean, it was tedious. All that meant is you could expect them to get a little bit further along on projects than they otherwise could before. But I certainly don't teach fluid mechanics, and they never pick up a pencil and work a problem. And I don't want to leave you with that impression. No, they work plenty of problems, but they do them in the context of, for instance, what do you think the spin on Tiger Woods' golf ball is when it's hit off the tee at an angle of 45 degrees, and how far will it go? That's the problem. And so the other kind of problems I'd like to give are open-ended problems, and they say, well, why are you letting us work together? And I said, because I'll know if you copied each other, because the problems I give you have multiple answers. There's no right answer. There's a reasonable answer, and there's an unreasonable answer. And part of being an engineer is knowing when you've reached an unreasonable answer. Like, if you're calculating velocity and the units end up in feet, you've probably made a mistake. Or if the velocity is faster than the speed of light, you've probably made a mistake. You know, to get them the intuition of thinking about, does this make any sense? So I like giving open-ended problems, ones that have multiple answers so students can work together and share. I can tell who's copied or not copied. And you know, quite frankly, I don't view myself as a policeman. People really care a lot more than I do about students who kind of game the system. And to me, and I tell them that, if you try it, good luck. You'll end up like Bernie Madoff. You know, you're just, it's not, life isn't going to unfold for you unless you put the effort in and do it. And I've had essentially no problem ever with that. So you're right, it is a balance. It's striking that balance between what I would call make work, mindless stuff, and then something that is so abstract that it is sort of like design a colony on the moon. Well, okay, But, in 10 weeks, I mean, that's difficult. So I build a house here, and I put some oxygen in it, and that doesn't get you anywhere. You need really to build a hot tub, or today I'm having them design. Now these are freshmen and sophomores. I said, you put stuff in the oven, and you cook it. And what kind of material do you use? Well, we use metal or glass or ceramic. I said, okay, I want you to use plastic. I want you to put in plastic. We can't, it'll melt. I said, that's your problem, not my problem. If yours melts, it didn't work. I want you to get some plastic, and I want you to design it, which is what plastic is, how you're going to do it, what the fillers are, and so forth. They haven't had any course in polymer science. Doesn't matter. They can go out and figure that out. And what I have a dialogue all week long with the teams as they're coming in. Is this okay? Is this? Because they're really concerned. They don't want to come in because they have to make an oral presentation in front of their other classmates. They don't want to look like fools. And so, and there's two groups doing the same assignment, so we can sort of see how they approached it differently. I had them made sutures, designed sutures that dissolve, that exist, but then don't give off toxins and don't cause problems, as many sutures do. And they don't have a medical background. But those are things, what's the size, what's the tensile strength? They finally arrive at, these are going to be important things. Someone's got to tie a knot and pull on it, and you don't want it to break. I think if they discover that for themselves, then they get much more motivated to sort of inquire as to what the next step is. But in terms of our job as teachers, we have to be there to help them. It's not running a daycare center. But on the other hand, we are putting them in a position where they're vulnerable, and they want to come back, and they expect to get some help. And if you're not willing to do that throughout the week, and respond to emails, most of them come in at 2 or 3 in the morning, and so you're answering them at 7, but then they're asleep, and you have sort of this diurnal disconnect. But it does get done. I don't know if I answered your question, but I think you struck it. It's an important consideration. It's a balance. More things to think about. Yeah. Yes.
A lot of your teaching style seems to be geared towards very close interaction, but a lot of back and forth. And I'm wondering how that scales in terms of you have a class of 120 as opposed to 20.
So the synergy class I taught, I thought I would get this last spring. I thought I'd get, a new class, hasn't been advertised, nobody knows what it is. I thought I'd get maybe 15, 20 students. So I get 100. I asked the question, how am I going to do this? So one of the things I do, and it's not easy for someone my age, but students tend to be a creature of habit. I find that they tend to sit in the same chair. So I can begin relating to the group as a whole. I can find people. So I form little images of who's there and who's there. Then I start asking them their names. And I do it kind of open, but I really make a conscious effort to try to learn as many names as I can. I find students really appreciate it. They walk in the door and say, hi, Bill, or hi, Joe, or something like that. I mean, right away, I think it's, it starts a bond. And then on the projects, I divide them up into small enough teams, usually teams of 4 to 8, that I can interact with them. And I get to know them in that setting. So I create essentially small classes out of a big class. And instead of having office hours, which I find kind of useless, quite frankly, because it's usually the people that are lazy. And that's not always true, but they come in and they want me to do the work for them. And I said, that's not what the office hour. Let's talk about life, or let's talk about Berkeley in the 60s. Oh, But if I'm meeting with them in a small room, projects, put aside an hour a week for 8 teams. That's 8 hours. But that's okay. I have a lot of fun, and I work closely with them. So that's how I do it. Is you just have to sector it up. Now it's not that I get to know everybody, but when cell phones came out, I used to have, okay, it's cell phone time. Who needs to call home? I'd take my cell phone out. I'd throw it to the student, and they'd call their mother. And I'm in class. And there are people yelling, hi, Mom, and stuff. If you just sort of break things up and do unusual stuff, you recapture the class. And some of it's a little nutty, but it tends to break up what I would call the routine Students come in, they sit in the same place, they unfold the same piece of paper, they take the same notes, you know. And so sometimes I'll have them stand up in the middle of class. If I see people starting to fall asleep, you know, I'm teaching the quad, you get these hot rooms, you can't open the windows, have been painted shut for 80 years. I make them all stand up, change seats, stretch, whatever. You have to be cognizant of what's going on in the classroom. I've seen so many people just keep lecturing. I mean, half the people are asleep. Why? You know, what are they doing? They don't, you know, you just deny it. And then people, you know, 20 minutes before start walking out. Or they're all you see is the daily, because they're all reading the daily, or they're all on their laptops. I mean, so I make them turn their cell phones off, and I say, no surfing. I give a few rules. I don't want you surfing. And if you're taking notes on your laptop, you're probably not getting it, because you really don't need to take notes, because I'll give you plenty of stuff, you know, and coursework that you can go view. And so just let's you and I have a little conversation here for an hour and a half. And I'll tell you, you'll retain the big idea. It's scary for them. You know, they don't do it that way. But that's how I split it up into little pieces. And by the way, there's no magic here. You know, you take whatever you can from this, you know, fun we've been having for the last hour. Some of it may work for you, and you may actually think I need to be in therapy. I mean, you know, it's okay. That's probably some truth in that. So anyway, thanks for your attention.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.